If you have a without rule of law situation and you have a major grid down situation, which is what a lot of people prepare for, something happens, cyber attack or otherwise, natural man-made happens to our grid,
Sure.
and it's down. Guess what? You're back in the 1800s or before.
John, how are you, sir?
Great. How you doing, Matt Todd?
I'm doing well. I'm so pumped to talk to you about this. And I've been, we briefly talked about it at a dinner months and months ago. Your wife had mentioned it to me and I was like, prepping, like, okay. And it's not that I was naive about it. We have, I don't want to say what we have in my house, but some resources, water bricks are very popular. I really love rice and beans. So we, 50-pound bag of rice and beans, but not full level of what people would consider like real prepping, more of just like, I got a little food, right? And in recent months, I've really started remembering back to a time when I was in college just after Hurricane Katrina. And a rowing coach of mine was telling me about this. I think it was like a 3,000 gallon water tank that he had. And I was like, water tank? Like, where the hell do you have a water tank? Now, mind you, this is Matt at like 20, 21. And he lived in the Oakland Hills. And he's like, listen to me. See what happened in Katrina? I was like, Jeff, we don't have hurricanes here. He's like, I don't care about hurricanes. I care about earthquakes, right? And I mean, he was literally right on this massive fault line. And I always remember him saying, he's like, if something happens, do you think Oakland PD is coming to help me? Do you think that there's a massive earthquake? We lose utilities. It's chaos everywhere. No. What happened in Katrina? The cops went home to save their families, right? And he had 3 young kids and a wife. And here's Matt at 21, like you're a little crazy, Jeff, but whatever. And now 3 kids and a wife later, I'm like, man, Jeff was onto something. And, again, I really want to start with your story of how you kind of got to being in this space as well, and really planning ahead, some small things and then some very, very large things, even where you decided to live, and just hearing about your journey of prepping.
Okay. Well, thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course.
So I think as we go and as we talk, I want to preface this by saying a couple things. So, anything we say here, certainly that I say, I'm not providing any financial advice, any legal advice, right? I'm being serious. And also, I'm not sponsored. If I do mention
that makes 2 of us. I don't make any money either.
I need to get you sponsored. Yeah. So if I do give the name of any products or show any products, it's because I believe in them. I've tested them. I've vetted them. And me and my family use those products, right? So I just want to start by saying that. And then as we also talk, there's really 2, and we can go down a lot of rabbit holes, which I don't want to do, but there's 2 big things. One is for prepping, what people prep for, and that is events, man-made or natural disasters with rule of law, and both man-made natural disasters without rule of law. I think those are 2 distinct differences. And depending on what you have in your kits and your supplies, which way that goes is going to be what you need. So we'll talk about those different things as we go.
I can't wait. It's going to be great. And again, I think it just comes back to the whole start of this just comes back to, it's like, listen, my friend Max sent me a book called, The Earth Abides. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And it's funny because he sent it to me over COVID, and I didn't even get through the whole thing because I was like, I can't read this. But the premise is that there's some like mass real like virus that goes through and kills 95% of the population. Like, and the main character in the book like wakes up in this cabin. He was feeling like hell, and then like he doesn't hear anything. He's like, where is everyone? And like a couple cars speed past, and then he eventually puts it together that he's like, oh, it's over. Like the party's over, right? Like there is nothing. And then he goes, it's funny because the book goes on these small tangents about like what happens to all of our dogs and like what happens to all of our cats. Right. And it's like the cats were barely ours in the first place. And they just went back to doing whatever cats do. And like the dogs that were upset in their kennels, barked for a couple of days and then just went to sleep. Same thing with like large dairies, same thing with, so there are all of these structures that we have in place that require constant maintenance. Yep. And we don't know how to maintain them at all. Like if I had to make a piece of plastic, I have no idea. Like this took the smartest scientists in the world to create. Like what are you going to go figure out where to mine ore? Like, I don't know how to make a piece. Like, I have cast iron pans that are considered like low tech cooking devices, right? Everybody has like the stone, whatever now. It's like, I couldn't make a cast iron pan to save my life. You know, these things took millennia of metallurgy and chemistry and technology. And now we exist at the top floor penthouse of this skyrise that's like 5,000 stories high. And we couldn't make the first story. Like we rely on it every day. MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.
Yep. So I think you make a good point. And one of those, when I talk about rule of law and without rule of law, which we'll talk about, one of the things is if you have a without rule of law situation and you have a major grid down situation, which is what a lot of people prepare for. Something happens, cyber attack or otherwise, natural man-made happens to our grid and it's down. Guess what? You're back in the 1800s or before. So whatever you have available to you now, and that also includes that if an EMP is involved with that, most electronics are going to be gone. So whatever you have or whatever you know how to make because of your skills is what you've got, right? So yeah, building buildings, making plastic, all that's going to be non-existent. Those factories and the equipment needed to make that is not going to be there if we don't have a power grid, right? So that's one thing that preppers plan for. And that's why in part of your prepping, you should plan to have some skills for something, right? If nothing else, defensive skills, right? Perhaps with firearms, hand-to-hand combat. Also know how to grow some food, right? Learn about gardens. You can't just get seeds and go plant it in a garden and think you're going to have a garden. It takes time. You actually need to learn how to plant those seeds. You need to learn which ones are going to take, which ones aren't because of the area you're in, right? In the zone. So there's a lot of things to talk about. But I also don't think that becoming a prepper or saying you're a prepper, you know, that's kind of a misnomer. It's a bad name. You know, you see National Geographic had, you know, doomsday preppers, and you had a lot of pretty extreme people on that show. And I think in Idaho in general, there's a lot of people that prepare that are preppers, that prepare themselves to take care of themselves, their families. Let's say, for example, there's a big LDS population here, right? And the LDS population and the church tells them to prepare, right? They do a lot of canning. They build up a lot of food. And why do they do that? For adverse situations. It could be you lost your job and you can't go buy food for your family, but if you have a food supply, you can utilize that food supply until you get another job.
Right.
Also for natural or man-made disasters, you can sustain your family, your friends, your relatives, but you can also help the church in spreading their word during those times as well. So the LDS community, certainly here in Idaho, has been doing this for a long time. And I think other than LDS people in Idaho in general, are people that are self-sustaining, right? They typically, and I'm generalizing here, but it's one of the reasons why I love Idaho. And why? People like to grow their own food. They like to grow but they like to grow their own meat, right? Grass-fed beef, sheep, even goats and chickens. And tend to their own gardens. They like to hunt, right? So that's a typical Idahoan. That's what Idaho has been for hundreds of years. And so when you come here and you have that mindset, it's very easily to get captivated by other people that are here that are already doing this type of thing. And you kind of build your preps based on what they've been doing. But being a prepper or deciding that you want to build up supplies for your family. And as we go, we'll talk about, you know, the main prep supplies you should talk about. There's certain orders. There's a top 4 for me, right? Water is number 1. We were talking earlier, you can't live more than about 2 or 3 days without water. If you don't have fresh, clean water you can drink and consume, forget about washing, then you're not going to make it past 3 days. Food, you know, you can go 7 days up to even 30 days without food, depending. But you need water. The second thing is you need shelter. And now this depends if you're in a hot climate or if you're in perhaps like a cold climate like we have here in the winter, certainly up in the mountains or in northern Idaho, you need to have shelter. And shelter includes some type of mechanism to protect you and your family, and also clothing included on that. You need to have the proper clothing for whatever season it is, right? And then beyond water and shelter, then you need to look at your food situation. And if you don't have food, if you haven't stocked up food, you're out of luck. You're foraging, right? Or hunting, which is extremely difficult in a, let's say, a grid down situation without rule of law. Finally, last, and it could be foremost, depending on your situation, but is security. Security and protection. You need to have some way to protect you and your family, and you need to know how to use it. Firearms, number one, right? You need to know how to use that firearm, not only for self-protection of you and your family, to protect your family, their lives, protect your property from other people wanting to come and take it, because that's going to be happening in that situation. But also if you need to hunt, right? Then we can also talk about what kind of firearms, because I think as, you know, having, oh, I've got a 9mm pistol, I'm fine. Or I've got a 12-gauge shotgun, I'm fine. Well, you know, I think if you talk about protection and if you talk about firearms for a moment, there's probably 4 or 5 different types of firearms that you should have to be fully encompassing for that situation, which we can talk about.
Yeah.
And you're good, right? So
listen, we're already getting into awesome things. What I would really like to know is, again, when people get introduced to this idea, they're kind of like, they probably haven't been there or considered everything. And it sounds like for you, you went through a gradual process of living life, experiencing certain things, being engaged in certain types of careers that led you to realize, like, okay, this is something that I have to commit my life to, because my life may depend on it. And there's a chance, and I don't want to be flat-footed. For people like me, especially like 21-year-old me, who had no concept of, one, responsibility, or two, that I was mortal at all, right? 21, I'm like, ain't nothing. I'll eat the solar flare, right? As dumb as that sounds. There's not, I lacked those experiences and those responsibilities that obligated me to consider these things. So if you would, like, walk me through your story and how you kind of got, you know, moved around the country, different careers, different experiences, and then decided, like, okay, I'm moving to the Treasure Valley and this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, thanks. I'll certainly do that. So this didn't happen overnight. Things in my life led me to where I am here today in the Treasure Valley, led me to say I need to prepare for my family's well-being. And, you know, so starting out, I was born and raised in Central Coast, California, San Benito County to be exact. My wife's from Santa Cruz County, and grew up in a fairly large family business. Our main business was a large grocery store operation, similar to, let's say, a Winco or a large Costco even. And then we had a lot of other satellite businesses as well. But so always growing up, you know, I didn't grow up, my dad wasn't a prepper. We weren't like, hey, we need to stock up on food and guns and ammo. We had all that. We always had what I would say a 30-day pantry supply, which I think any family should at least shoot for that in the interim. Get a 30-day pantry supply, enough that you and your family can live out of your pantry pretty good for 30 days, right? So we always had that. My mom was Hispanic. She made a lot of food always. And so we had that. But what we also had was our large grocery store operation. And we were the largest grocery store in the region. So growing up, if we ever need anything, it was like, look, we don't need to worry about prepping and stocking up stuff at the house. We got everything we need at the store. All we need to do, if there's issues or disasters or riots or whatever, is protect the store, right? Protect that location. And there were certain things over the years that actually led to that. So I'll say one of the first ones that I remember, mid-'80s, I don't know if it was 85, 86, but around in the mid-'80s. So we had about 150 full-time employees, 175 total employees at this large grocery location. We were a non-union outfit, you know, private business, non-union. We paid our employees well. We had a lot of employees that were with us for many years. They loved us. We loved them. We took care of our employees. We had an employee stock ownership plan, which is similar to what Winco has.
I was going to say they're employee owned.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so were we. And we put 25% of their annual salary into an employee stock ownership plan every year, right? So when we ultimately sold the grocery store business, there was a lot of people that got a lot of money out of that. So took care of our people. We were a non-union shop though. In the mid-'80s, a lot of farm workers in the Central Coast, California. One of the biggest union was the UFW, United Farm Workers, led by Cesar Chavez, right?
Do me a favor.
Yeah.
Push the bottom portion of this microphone just like an inch that way. There you go. There, perfect.
Oh,
that's
okay.
it. That now the mic's pointed towards your mouth.
Got it.
You're coming in and out of like fantastic. I was like, no, you're good. You're good. Okay. So Cesar Chavez.
He
comes for John.
He founded the labor union, right? UFW. And we had a lot of farm workers in our community. So they were trying to go into all the local grocery stores, which are already union, by the way. We were a non-union shop, and turn their people union, right? To join the UFW. And so they would come to our employees, and our employees were like, oh, we don't want to have anything to do with you. We have we love our people. We
I'm
love
partial
our
owner.
I'm partial owner.
Get out of here.
Right. So that's what was happening. So it started progressively getting worse and worse, right? So they would bring in agitators, and in those days, agitators were gangbangers, right? So they would bring in gangbangers, and they were throwing bricks and rocks at our plate glass windows. Now, we had a large, almost 100,000 square foot store on a 5-acre property, a lot of parking, a lot of entrances, ingress and egress. And so they started to picket. And when they picketed, again, they brought in agitators that were causing problems up into including going in and trying to start fights with our employees because they didn't want to join their union. And the fights led to very large 20, 30, 40 person fights between their labor people and our employees, right? And so local police came in, they had to man all the entrances. But I mean, I can tell you, and it was a big concern, the violence was ramping up. But I remember being a late teenager. I think I was probably 17, 16 at the time. But I was right there with my family members and our employees. And, you know, we called in armed private security. We had the local police, but we were also manning the roofs of our store on each corner with a group of guys with either shotguns or rifles. And I was right there with them. It was a scene right out of Koreatown on the LA riots, right? Yeah. I mean, it was very similar to that.
I was going to say, I have a very dear friend, Jerry, whose dad and grandfather owned a liquor store right across the street from a hospital in LA during the riots. And they were on their roofs, like with, again, armed, keeping people away from the liquor store. I mean, in the midst of riots, obviously you're going to go straight to a liquor store.
Yep.
Or maybe you wouldn't, but some people are like, that's where I'm going.
Right.
And man, what an unbelievable thing that you had to take the defense into your own hands.
Right. So we did that. Over time, it receded. They figured out they weren't going to turn our employees, and they left. But that was a major event for several weeks. I think it lasted a month or two, actually, and it got pretty violent there for a while. So that was the closest time we're like, oh, we really have to protect what we have. Then a few years later and you're from California, so you probably remember this, 1989, Loma Prieta earthquake, right? 6.9 earthquake.
I remember that day distinctly, yeah.
Well, tell me about it. You want?
So I was 7. I think we were playing hide and go seek, and I was in my neighbor's front lawn. I was like running across the grass, and ground starts shaking. Everything is bonkers. I have a old grandfather clock, I guess, that tipped over, slammed. We had a pool in our backyard, and the water's going crazy. And from that day, my mom, it was not great. Like, it was very scary. But again, as a 7-year-old, you're like, okay, it stopped shaking. Okay, great. And yeah. I don't really know anything. Amazingly, the news starts doing coverage, San Francisco, the whole thing. And I think this was the first time that my dad really emphasized, he's like, listen, I know this is really scary. And when you see things on TV, look for all of the people helping. He's like, the people helping are the people you want to focus on. And there was this emphasis of, there are people that come out and shine in the time of crisis. And I was like, damn. That's a different way of looking at it. And from that time on, my mom always had a backpacking bag, like she's like going to go on a hike thing in her car. And she was like, listen, if the big one comes, I'm coming home. And I'm like, you're coming? Where are you going in the first place? Anyway, yeah, but that was a crazy time. My dad actually was working in surgery, and the Bay Bridge obviously collapsed, a portion of it. And he had friends who that were physicians that crawled onto the Bay Bridge with this collapsing bridge to amputate people's limbs in their cars. Wow. And then drag them out. And they didn't know if they were going to, the bridge could have collapsed at any point, crushed them. They could have fallen into the water. And you had people that really became their best selves in that situation.
I think you're absolutely right. My story is going to be very similar. I don't know your dad, but I like him already. And that bag that your mom was carrying around, we call that nowadays a get home bag, right? That's not a bug out bag. It's a get home bag. Right. And for your mom to have the foresight of that years ago is incredible. So similar story. We had a grocery store. We sold a lot of products. Pepsi was one of our biggest product we sold. So Pepsi gives us free tickets. a cousin and I go to the World Series at the time, 1989. Now the World
Battle
Series,
of the Bay.
Battle of the Bay, right?
That was the
Oakland
Giants.
A's and the San Francisco Giants
yeah.
at Candlestick Park.
Yeah, right.
And so, which it's not there anymore, or at least they don't use it anymore. But we used to go there all the time. And I remember we just checked in. We were walking around the perimeter, trying to find our seats, what section we were in, and the earthquake started. And I recall looking out in the parking lot and seeing what looked like a 5 or 6 foot wave rolling through the parking lot, and all the cars were just shaking left and right. It was amazing. I'd never seen anything like that before. And I live in earthquake capital of the world, right? So,
but what a like to have that advantage of man-made like asphalt and concrete just moving like a fluid wave.
You would not think that asphalt could move that high or stretch that far and then go back to its shape for the most part, right? And what we also saw was all the garage doors, like on the concession stands on the outside of the stadium. It sounded like somebody was just pounding on them. Well, what it was is they were just shaking in place.
Sure.
So we go down, we find our seat, and a few minutes later, people had small TVs and radios. It became very apparent that that was a pretty big earthquake. And like you said,
the game went on.
Well, everybody thought it was. People were sitting down. They're like, "Hey, we're here for this great Battle of the Bay," right? So everybody sat down. We're waiting, and it became very apparent the Bay Bridge had partially collapsed, like you were just talking about. That it was a big deal. So over in Santa Cruz, Monterey, San Benito County, where I was from, kind of the South Bay area, buildings were falling down. It was pretty bad. So it was like, all right, I think we need to get out of here. So it was about 20 minutes later, they announced on loudspeakers, game's done, everybody leave. Well, when that happens and you have tens of thousands of people there, it is complete gridlock in the parking lot, right? So we stayed, I think, 6 hours or so ish.
I would have
just
finished
getting out of the
beer.
parking lot.
I would have finished. I would have been like, "Listen, I'm leaving, but can I get a road dog? Like, what are we doing here?"
So now it's 1989. There's cell phones around, and I remember at that time I did have a cell phone. It was one of the big bricks that had the antenna coming in. It was in my car. I go to my car, old Ford Bronco. It didn't work. Right, it wasn't working. Cell phones are down. And a funny side story to that is, I don't know if you remember who George Zimmerman is. He was president of the Men's Warehouse, right?
Yeah.
He always made commercials.
You're going to like the way you look.
Absolutely. That's him. So he was parked next to us in a 4-door sedan Jaguar. And I saw him, and he had, although it was also like a brick, it was like a newer flip phone. And he was on his phone talking to somebody. So I was desperately trying to call back to my family and my dad, "Hey, what's going on with the store? What's the situation?" Because I knew it was bad.
Yeah.
Not only did we have a large store with products on shelves, but we had a huge warehouse behind it, stacked with pellets, floor to ceiling. So I couldn't get out. I see him using his. I offer him $100 to use his, and it was working. So I made a phone call.
Did he take the $100?
He did take the $100.
God,
and
George,
you know what?
Come on, man! You're the Men's Warehouse guy.
You kid over here.
Oh my God! He's like, "Thank you."
So while he took my money and I'm on the phone, what does he proceed to do? He opens his trunk. It's him and a friend, and they close the trunk. He's got this briefcase, and I'm like, "What does he have? Like a bag phone in there? Like a sap?" I've never seen it. So he opens his briefcase, and he's got a liquor bottle in there, 2 glasses and 2 cigars, and they break that out and they're on his trunk and they're hanging out because we're stuck. So I mean, I made my phone call, and it was like worst case scenario. My dad's like, "Hey, when you can get home, because I had my dad's brother with me, my cousin, and it's just like structurally everything's fine, but everything on any shelf, any box, any case of whatever is down." So we spend the next 12 or 14 hours. We get about halfway home. We end up staying at the Red Lion Inn in San Jose for a few hours.
Sure.
And then get home the next morning, and it was an absolute disaster. There was a lot of older buildings in our city that had actually fallen down, crushed, gone. And so we were actually the only grocery store in the region that was even able to open. But we had a problem. Literally everything was all over the floors. So you talk about community. You know, we're one of the largest stores in the region, a lot of customers. We had our 150, 175 employees calling all hands. Everybody was in there working 24/7. What we also had was community members and customers that had shopped with us for years came in and said, "Look, we don't want anything, but we want to help you because there's a lot of people that need to come in and get some food and water and whatever," right? And so for the next week, certainly the next 2 or 3 days, it was merely cleanup. And we had probably 150-ish, maybe 200 community members that were like full-time employees in there for a week. They were in there 12, 14-hour days. Not only did we have to do the cleanup, then we had to find out what was good, restock everything, and then open the store. And again, we were the only store open in the region, so I'd never seen it so big. There's lines out the door. We got police officers posted at every entrance. It was fairly orderly, but people needed to get supplies, and we were there allowing them to do that. A lot of the supplies were given out for free, but I remember the community coming, hundreds of people, and just came and helped us because they wanted to make sure everybody else was able. So, we fed them, and we had 24-hour shifts. We fed them, and after it was done in the week and everything subsided a little bit and we got caught up, I remember my dad, he's like, go over, get like $500-600 cash, put it in every envelope and go hand it out to everybody. Right. So we're basically paying everybody for working for a week.
Yeah. Right.
So anyways, but it's a great story of how the community saw the need. They came and they helped because they knew everybody else in the area. And also keep in mind, FEMA was activated. They took forever bringing down, you couldn't drink the water, right? All the water was shut off, city water services. So FEMA was bringing in these big semis. There was lines lining up with people with anything from a 1-gallon milk jug to a 5-gallon container trying to get fresh water that they can drink. So it was pretty bad.
And this is 1989. So imagine how many people lived in that area.
So in our county, it was about 50,000 at that time.
So you have 50,000 people living in a normal area in, developed California that are lining up just trying to get potable water.
Right.
They're like, we don't have anything. Yep. And this is not like a freak accident. This is just, hey, look, we had a bad earthquake.
Yep.
We live in earthquake country. And guess what? You have nothing now. Right. Like you're not going to go 72 hours unless this semi with water shows up or you get water from somewhere else.
Absolutely. And what they were also telling you is don't drink any water, right? Unless you're on a well. If you're on a well, then you might be okay. But any other city services water, don't. But also in addition to that, it's like, look, don't sleep in your homes. They haven't been structurally checked. We don't know if there's issues with them. Do not stay in your home. So people were sleeping in their cars. They were grabbing whatever food and blankets they could and pillows and sleeping in their cars for a week outside, only running into the home to maybe go to the restroom or whatever, right? So it was that bad in the general area, right? The Monterey, Santa Cruz, South Bay area. But again, the story was the community chipped in. And when you have issues like that, you're going to need community, right? If something adverse happens and you think you're going to build a bunker in your backyard and go live in that bunker by yourself and come out 5 years later and be great, you're not. It's not going to happen. In order to survive in any situation, whether it's short-term or long-term, you need community, you need other people. You also need people you can trust. So family members, close friends, but you need community, right? So, but at any rate, so there was a few things that happened. And then over the years also, again, large grocery store, but we also cashed a lot of checks. We took all utility bills. You could pay your PG&E and your cable bill and telephone bill there. We cashed checks. That was part of the marketing, the grocery store is you can come in, cash your check. We didn't charge you, but let's say if you had a $600 or $700 check, you would get $595. And then you would get these little tokens we had, right? Which were $1. You had to spend those in the store. Like you couldn't get change back. So, but mostly,
they got the full value.
They got the full value of the money, right?
Right.
There was we didn't charge. So, but most of the time, okay, you cash $600, $700, $800 check. They're going and they're spending, a huge basket or two. They're giving you about $400 back in groceries, right? So that was the reason why we did it. But because we did that, we had an office with multiple booths, kind of like a bank. And we were like a bank. We actually had more cash in our store than all the banks. And we had all the big banks in town, but we kept more cash in our store than all the big banks in town put together, right? And so we would have an armored car. And I can say this now, there's no OPSEC, there's no issues because we're not operating, right? But so I remember in the days when I was 17, 18 years old, we would come up on a big, let's say a holiday weekend.
4th of July or something.
4th of July. And we just had, and it's like first of the month, right? People were getting their checks. And let's just say we had an armored car roll up because we'd have a delivery every day, $200,000 every day, coins, currency. And if we ran out, or if it's going to be a long weekend, by Friday afternoon, we're calling all the local banks. Hey, do you have 100,000? Do you have 200,000 available in 20s and five? And if they did, they would load it up for us. And like, I remember when I was 17, I can laugh about it now, but I'm like 17, and my dad and my uncle, whoever, would usually go do that. And they're like, John, go over and pick up some cash at the bank. Go to this bank, go to that bank. So I'd do like 3 stops, and I'm getting 50 grand here. I'm getting 150 here. And so I had like 300 grand on me at times. And we carried it just an undescript little paper grocery bag, right? And I had like a shotgun in my truck, but I wasn't carrying a pistol or anything in those days.
Gosh.
And so I laugh about it now because, you can't do that. And nowadays people are a lot more aware. But because of that, I say that, and that's the type of business we had. And I say that because over the years, we had not only major shoplifting issues because of the product we had available. I mean, we had 2 aisles where it's just open liquor, right? California, you sell liquor at grocery stores. And so we had one aisle of just all hard alcohol. The next aisle is wine. People will come in and be stealing product down their, down their waistline and walking out. We also had a huge cigarette rack with cartons of cigarettes that were accessible. Same thing there. Get a carton or 2 of cigarettes, stiff them down your pants, and you're walking out the door. So
a quick question, small digression. Have you ever seen the comic skit where there's a giant African-American lady who gets up on stage? She's like, things have been crazy lately. And she starts pulling stuff, and she pulls out like cigarettes.
She's got like a mini market.
She's got the whole time, every time she pulls something else out, the crowd gets louder and louder and louder until she pulls out like a full bottle of vodka and soda, and she's smoking a cigarette. She's like, nah. She's like an opener for somebody. She's great. Like the funny stuff ever.
I've seen that in real life, right? And these were back in the days where we didn't lock. Nowadays, everything's locked up. Cigarettes are behind the counter. They're locked up.
They lock up toothpaste. Like, you ever been into a drugstore recently in California?
No, but everything's locked up.
Literally, they have. Like, you can't buy anything there, right? It's like you go to Oakland. I have to fly into Oakland soon. It's not great. But you go into Oakland and, man, you go into any store and it's like the most innocuous items are just locked up.
And I think they have to because sign of the time. So, but in those days, so we literally were catching like 10 shoplifters a day. Like me, I was catching 10 shoplifters a day, 15 a day. And back in those days when somebody has $150 worth of alcohol and cigarettes and you stop them and you're a store clerk, even though you might have a little manager vest on, right? They're like, you're not stopping me. Yeah, I'm out of here. And so in California, you can use reasonable force to keep them there and detain them until the police came. And we did that. So
I had brass knuckles. And
No. So, I mean, at a very young age, I actually became a police cadet or explorer with the sheriff department. It's kind of what started my kind of law enforcement career. Wanted to do that. And I did that at 16. And I did it because I was catching shoplifters at 14 and 15. And some of these were older males and they're like, no, kid, I'm not coming back in the store with you. I'm out of here. And I would, no, you're not. And we would get into a scuffle. And, I love to say nobody ever got away, right? And so literally
sorry about that backup disc mistake. Anyway, bottom line is you start engaging with law enforcement and, you're doing this work. People don't want to listen to you when you're like 14, 15, 16, and you try to pull them back into the store. But again, you start working with law enforcement and get after it.
Yeah. So I learned I need some skills. I need some training, right? I don't like fighting with people, although we had to, and we used reasonable force to keep them there. You're trying to hold them till the police come. So I became a police cadet explorer with the local sheriff department and learned, right? So learned defensive tactics. You get to go on ride-alongs. You make arrests with the other officers. And so I did that for 4 years up until when I turned 20 years old and actually became a deputy with that department. But so what I did that to really train myself. I need to be trained on these issues that I'm seeing every day at our family business. And also because we were a high volume business, we had the crime increased, right? A lot of crime. We had robberies there. And I mean robberies where somebody comes in, fills a basket up, like a felon that just got out of prison, with alcohol and diapers and the most expensive items in the store and tries to walk out the store. And when 2 or 3 of the store employees try to stop him, he pulls a gun on you, right? And now you're fighting for the gun because our motto was, hey, and again, we were a family business. So me and my cousins, my uncles, all the close family who who primarily own that business were like, look, it's like they're stealing from us, right? So we want to make sure we take care of these people and we stop this. And it's a great deterrent if you arrest people for shoplifting, certainly bigger amounts. A pack of gum or whatever, you can mitigate that. But bigger amounts, we weren't having it.
I made a citizen's arrest when I was 17.
Good for you. What happened?
I was arguing with my girlfriend in the driveway, and it was like, 9:00 at night. And I look in the rearview mirror. We're sitting in the car, and my neighbor's minivan light comes on and then turns off, and then 3 dudes walk past. I'm like, they just stole it. And it's like, I'm all teed up because I'm arguing with April, right? And so I get up, I'm like, what's up, guys? What are you? It's just like 3 dudes. Like, what are you doing, Matt? Like, thinking back on the 17 years, like, how dumb can you be, right? And chase them down. 2 dudes take off. I was able to chase them down, detain one of them. Yeah, I was captain of the wrestling team at the time. So I was like, I've had an overinflated sense of capacity.
You had the skills.
Plus, I had cardio. Like they could not outrun me. Right. Yeah, and then the cops came, and he had actually thrown the purse, my neighbor's purse, up on an RV, and the cops like, there's nothing here, man. I'm like, no, I know he took. And then I found the little thing, the handle sticking out from the top of the RV. So I found the evidence. I detained the suspect. And
great job.
Yeah,
great job.
Congratulations. Hey, not thousands, but one.
Well, so that was something we were doing every day, right? And some of it was bigger than other. In California, you can use reasonable force to keep people there until you call the police and turn them over. If you walk into a structure with the intent to commit a crime or commit theft, it's burglary, right? So it's a felony. So a lot of that also. And because we cashed a lot of checks, we had a lot of check fraud. Somebody would go do a burglary, break into somebody's home, find their checkbook. They would write out a check for a couple $100, come to our office window. Now, fortunately, the customer was a good customer, or the check was a good customer of ours. So we would call them and be like, hey, did you write so-and-so a check? They're trying to cash a check here for $400. I have no idea who that was. Great, we got him, right? So we get the cops on the horn, we get them coming. In the meantime, we're taking a long time. This guy decides to run. But we got felony forgery. We got a lot of felonies here. So they didn't get away. And back in the day, I could run pretty good too. I can run decently now, but nobody got away, right? So that's what we did. But because of that, and because of the nature of our operations, like I already said, people knew we cashed a lot of checks. We had a lot of cash coming in and out of there. We had a lot of security procedures in place. And, we were a family-owned business. There was quite a few firearms on the premises. We did get robbed. Over the years, one of our armored car, there was a major robbery in the parking lot. Where there was an armored car heist. We had a huge heist and a hostage situation where somebody came in, snuck in overnight, gathered around all the employees that came in about 5 a.m, including my uncle, who was the lead manager, and took them all hostage. Tried to get my uncle to open up the safe because he knew there was money in there. My uncle is an old Vietnam War veteran. He wouldn't do it. And so the guy tries to cut off his hands with the machete. He had a machete and he had a sawed-off shotgun. And, they got in a fight, and on his way out, he ended up shooting a breadman that was coming in that was trying to help my uncle. And he ended up hiding in a field and getting caught by the local police department very shortly thereafter.
Was the breadman okay?
Breadman was shot in the thigh. He ultimately recovered and retired. But yes, Lloyd, great guy.
Good job.
He wasn't killed. But again, that was just the tenacious attitude that my dad wasn't there. Otherwise, it would have been my dad. He was out of town. And there's a lot of things that led up to it. They were casing our house ahead of time. They had an accomplice that didn't get caught. They were in a blue Mustang. I saw the blue Mustang and a kid in front of my house for like a week before this happened, right? So they were casing it all out. And so at the end of the day, it just shows, like I said, it was a family business. If you steal from us, you're like stealing from our family, And so my uncle could have opened that safe, and that guy could have got a pretty good score out of there, a couple $100,000, but he didn't. He wasn't going to open it. He wasn't going to allow this guy to take that money from us, and he'd rather fight him, right? So is it the best thing in the world? No, but that was his decision, and I guess it kind of worked out. So we had that stuff over the years.
And again, I don't mean to interject, but talk about having a resource that people want, not just food and liquor, but money, right? Yeah. And it shows you, I mean, again, in your story of prepping, I have to imagine this is one of those great, repetitive, overwhelmingly clear lessons, which is if you have something other people want, they can turn into terrible people.
And they probably will when disaster hits, right? And even, if you're known as somebody who stocks up on food and wants to prepare for your family, you're going to know friends, even other family. They're like, well, hey, I know where to go if something happens. Or I don't need to stock up. I don't need to have extra food or water or guns or ammo or anything else. I can just come to you, right? Not always going to be the case, right? So that's how I grew up. A lot of different things happen, man-made, natural things. And so in 2010, and by the way, I got hired on with the sheriff department when I was 20 as a deputy. So I did that. I lived in two worlds. I was running family business and then also working as a sheriff deputy in the local area. I also worked on the California Narcotics Task Force, doing a lot of marijuana up in Humboldt and Mendocino counties, right? Did that for 3 years. So after I do all that, it's like 2010, and our business, family business, was like third generation family business. Now, at this point, my father had passed away in 99. We had like 12 different commercial businesses, retail, sold all those, turned it into a commercial property business. But for 10 years, we were essentially a commercial property business, and we operated our own property management, and we were developers. That's kind of what we did. But like any other company, family business, unfortunately, we were in third generation. When you get to third generation, you get some people that aren't interested in being involved in the family business anymore. Right. You know, your first cousins, maybe your aunts or uncles, they have different interests. They want to be bought out. They want to go do whatever they want to do, that they've always wanted to do, but they've been tied down because of the family business and the store and whatever else. So
you have all my money. You have my money. I can't touch it.
I want my money and I want to go.
My money.
So over those years, we paid out a lot of people, and then it was, myself, mother, and I. But I won't get into all that. But basically, again, third generation, you get into family blowouts, and we had that. You have some people that work and run the business, and others that don't, and still get the same benefits. So we left. We didn't want the chaos. We didn't want the drama. Me and my wife and two boys, we decided it's time to leave the family business. It was a heart-wrenching decision, but we did that in 2010. What am I going to do now? Well, at that point, my sheriff, who had been there, either as the sheriff or undersheriff for over 20 years, was retiring, and it looked like some out-of-town guy was going to come in and be sheriff. So it was like good time to leave. Plus everything else that's happening in California. I was a local business guy. I saw all the politics that was happening. I saw the direction it was heading at that time. Time to go. So I decided to go work in federal law enforcement, take the big leap. We move all the way across country to Alexandria, Virginia, about 8 to 10 miles outside of Washington, D.C. And I go work for the Treasury Department in law enforcement in downtown D.C. from about 2010 to 2012. Again, you look at your progress in life, what leads. During our time in Washington, D.C., there was, I think it was early 2011, there was or maybe late 2010, there was a major hurricane that came in. Now, Washington, D.C. is about, 30, 40 miles inland. I mean, it's not going to take a major hit. Sure. But if there's a hit on the coast, it's going to come inland, right? So there was a major storm, hurricane hitting. And when that got announced, I mean, Washington, D.C., and if you know about the Beltway, right? The Beltway, which basically loops and circles all of Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland area, right? They call it the Nova area. It's traffic jam. You're not getting out of there. You're done. You might as well get out of your vehicle and walk home because everything is gridlock. So when that hurricane was announced, all the federal buildings got shut down, federal employees, customers, everybody got sent home, mass chaos, mass gridlock. You try to go to any local supermarket and get anything, bread, milk, water, gone, right? And separate from that, if you really wanted to get out of the area, even past the Beltway was gridlock. Highway 95, going north-south, everything was gridlock. Good luck getting out, right? So, we were renting a place there. We were there for 2 years, renting a home, and we had some preps. Again, I always did like the 30-day pantry prep, right? That was kind of my thing because growing up, that's what we did. But I didn't have a bunch of extra supplies, and we looked at that situation like, if something major happened beyond this, we're done. We're kind of out of luck. So the next thing that happened was, I believe it was August 2011. I'm working downtown DC, and a major earthquake hits. Now, earthquakes in that area are very rare. This earthquake centered just north of Richmond, Virginia. It was a 5.8, and just rocked DC to its core. DC hadn't had an earthquake like that in decades, if not ever. Same thing. Everybody freaked out, and there was building moves. A lot of older buildings in DC. A lot of them are marble and limestone, very well built, but there's some older ones too. Everybody freaked out. I was in a building. I helped evacuate everybody out. But everything went on lockdown. All federal buildings in the DC area went on lockdown. Everybody gets sent out of DC, right? What happens? I mean, there's only 2, maybe 3 bridges in and out of DC to Virginia. Gridlock. You're not getting out. So it was, again, mass chaos. Then everybody, once they did get back into their area of Virginia, let's say, or Maryland, if they're on the other side, try to go to the grocery store after the earthquake. Again, all water is gone, all milk is gone, all bread is gone, cat food. Surprisingly, there wasn't a run on toilet paper, right?
No.
But anything else that you need.
Talk about talk about people being taken by the most nonsensical thing ever. This is, again, right when you got here, I was talking to you about people on social media influencing actual activity in the real world. Like, here's a person who literally just records themselves, says a bunch of stuff, and then as a consequence, a bunch of people change their behavior. Toilet paper is one of them. Like that whole thing came from believing that the bulk of our toilet paper came from China and the supply lines were going to end.
Right.
And it's like, okay, but even if you lost all toilet, can you take a shower? Like, do you just like fake a bidet, get a garden hose? I don't know what to tell you. Like, you're going to be okay.
Right. Yeah. You could still go to the bathroom.
Yeah,
There's
right.
other stuff.
It's not like you got to hold it.
Right. So totally true. 100% right on. So we saw that. So couple natural disasters happened. People freaked out, and we really looked at ourselves. You know, my 2 boys, my oldest boy was at that year, the second year was 8th grade, getting ready to go into high school. It's like, do we want to be over here during the high school years? Because wherever we're at for high school, we'd already talked about, my wife and I, that's where we're going to be.
Right.
We want a stability for our boys. We already moved them across country in middle school. And so, although I liked what I was doing and I enjoyed it, it just, we kind of weren't East Coast people necessarily, or the family wasn't. It was like, let's go somewhere else. Now, I had a book and I forgot to bring it. Joel Skousen, right? Skousen, Strategic Relocation is the name of the book. Now, I wasn't going back to California. I did have.
That's a good call, because it was not getting any better.
There was the option, but I wasn't going to do it.
Yeah, right.
And I did have some law enforcement jobs over there that I can easily get into and continue that there, but I just did not want to do that. And so I had some friends here and also family that had lived here for years. And we'd always talk to them, and they'd come to California and we'd talk about Boise. And so at any rate, I flew out here on an Easter weekend with the boys. My wife didn't want to go. She didn't want to fly, and she wanted to stay back. It's okay. So we flew out, met with some friends here, went around and put an offer on a house. Like, we're buying this house. It was a 1/2 acre, new development.
50,000, no problem.
Well, it was low 300s, which today that same house is going for the high 900s, right? So
that's awesome.
2 months later,
we
moved out here. But part of the theory of coming here, and it just didn't happen on a whim. I say it that easy, but before that, there was a lot of preparation. Where do we go? Why do we want to go there? What do we want to do with the rest of our life? We had already seen these issues there, and I'll talk about one other disaster issue that I saw based on where I was working that is still prevalent today. But we don't want to be necessarily in DC area. We don't want to go back to California. Where do we go? So I bought this book, Strategic Relocation. He's a retired Joel Skousen. He's an LDS community member. He's a retired United States Marine Corps fighter pilot out of the Vietnam War. He's still around today. You can find him online. And he has a very thorough book that talks about not only other countries and the civil unrest in those countries, but every state, what the resources are for the state, what the crime stats are, what the likelihood for civil unrest, also natural disasters. And believe it or not, one of the top 10 was the Treasure Valley, Boise area. Why? Well, no major natural disasters, right? We don't have tornadoes necessarily. We don't have hurricanes. Very rarely do we have earthquakes. We don't have any other major type of storm, no floods, no tidal waves, right? So there was really only like one major thing, the caldera at Yellowstone, right? Like, good luck if that explodes.
Right.
If it's a big enough explosion, nobody's surviving that.
Right.
Although if it's not a huge explosion, if it does explode and there's ash and everything's sent, it's going to be sent eastward, not towards us, right? Because the wind blows that way. So, and also one of the biggest things was the crime, and he has all this in his book, crime, housing prices. Again, that was back in 2012. All those, the people in that state being self-sufficient, self-aware, self-sufficient, but also very uniquely, if you live in this area, if you go to drive anywhere, go drive to Portland, go drive to Seattle, go drive to Bozeman, go drive to Salt Lake City or Reno, Nevada. What is that? That's 6 or 7 hours of driving, no matter where you go, in a car. And what do you have to do to get there? You have to traverse deserts and mountains, right? So the good thing about that is, if ever someday, again, this is worst case scenario, hopefully it never happens, but if ever someday there is some major civil unrest, God forbid, a nuclear war, EMP, you're going to have major issues in populated cities. After a period of time, when there's no food and no water, what are those people going to do? They're going to start moving out into the countryside, right? And then they're going to start migrating. When they've depleted all the resources in that area, they're going to say, time, let's say for California, for example, time to leave the Bay Area. Let's go up to Boise, Idaho, right? They have fair weather. We can grow our own food. There's a lot of room up there. But they're probably going to have to do that, depending on the situation, on foot, right? If it's a large disaster situation.
They're not making it here on
They're
foot.
not making it here. They're going to stop somewhere else because, again, you have 6-7 hours by car. You have days of traversing through desert, through mountains to get here, right? So they're going to go elsewhere, most likely, before they end up here.
They'll get to Winnemucca on foot and then be like, all right, it's a straight shot. And it's going to take us a month
through the mountains.
Yeah. And it's like, oh yeah, just go straight on this road for the next 30 days.
Right.
And like, yeah, you'll get there
and
if you survive the next 30 days.
Yeah, don't do it through winter because it's going to be like Donner Pass up there.
Right. And summer's not going to be too great either.
Right.
Like, I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and one of the things as you talk is like, you can drive farther in a car in 1 hour than you can walk all day. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So if you think about that, right, that's just
75
standard.
an hour. Yeah.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason that led us here. And we're like, okay, let's go there. Politically, it's a red state. They have our same beliefs. It's a Christian state, same beliefs. It was a great fit for me and my family. So we moved here. And when we moved here, again, the house we bought was less than a year old, new development, and it was kind of over down by Eagle High School.
Don't say that. Don't say where you live.
Okay. Yeah, I know.
They're coming for you.
But that's old. That's old.
Okay.
Anyway, it was a new development. It was on half an acre, and we came and it was a great location, but we had an HOA to deal with, right? And it was almost like California. I was like, you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that. Oh yeah, by the way, you're the new guy. We want you to be the HOA president, right? And I'm like, really? So, our HOA charter says we can only have 4 animals, 2 dogs, 2 cats. Can we do some chickens in the backyard if you have a small little cute coop, maybe from Pottery Barn or, a couple hens, no roosters? Nope, absolutely not. Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll be the president for 1 year. After that year, we're going to take a vote. Well, we did that. It took 75% of the people to change. Now, our community had about 50%, there was 30 homes. About 50% were younger, predominantly LDS family, a lot of children, big families,
right,
or retirees from like Portland or Seattle, sure, right? Wherever, mostly from there though, believe it or not. And so there was always this clash in the neighborhoods, right? Between those two. So as HOA president, whenever somebody doesn't like something that somebody's doing, they call you. First day out, I get a call. Hey, Joe down the street didn't bring his garbage cans in. Garbage day was yesterday. He's supposed to bring them in. I don't care. Don't call me for that. Right? Like, it's not why I'm here. I'm doing this because in a year from now, I want to vote for chickens. I want to have a victory garden, right? So anyways, it didn't work out. But because it didn't work out, and because we came here thinking Idaho has vast land, there's a lot of land here. We want a little farm. Of course, we had to find something we can afford, and that was reasonable. But so we went on a search to find something. And we found the property we're at today. And it's a 7-acre farm. And it's an older Cape Cod style house. It has a couple shops on there and a barn. And we call it a gentleman's farm because we don't make any money from it. But it has allowed us in the last 10 years to grow our own food. We run Black Angus cattle on there and have our own grass-fed beef. We ran our own sheep on there. We have dozens of chickens. We had goats at one time that are going to eat down the pasture so you don't have to mow it, and large gardens every year, right? So we wanted to be a little more self-sufficient. And that place, we kind of got on a foreclosure and got a great deal. It's worth like 3 times what it is now, and we would probably never sell it, but we're glad we got in at the right time. And one of the things we'll talk about as we go on here, because that was part of the plan, and I'll tell you why in a moment, is financial security. So in addition to having,
And by the way, speaking of financial security and chickens, we rip through, amongst other things, 18 eggs in the morning.
one day, every
One
day?
day. So I have 3 boys, me and my wife, and we will literally rip through a dozen and a half eggs
I believe it.
with pancakes and fruit and other stuff.
Absolutely.
Like, I have a 7-year-old who individually can put down 8.
Oh my goodness.
Like, you can load him up with 4 and he's like, what do you, is this it? You're like, okay, I'm making more right now.
Have all you want. I mean, eggs
Yeah,
are
right.
one of the most nutrition dense
so
foods, right?
great.
Like
Yeah,
have
yeah.
at it. And
I asked
you do eat-
McIntyre pastors if they were taking investors. I was like, could I be an investor and then get like a discount on the eggs? He's like, that's not a model we've explored.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, but so because we do a dozen every morning between me and my boys and wife. We do a dozen easy, and 3 eggs each, right? Or 4 eggs each. I mean, gone. So it's great if you have a couple dozen chickens out and you can go in and get a dozen to 18 eggs every morning, and that's your right. So we've done that and we love it, and it's probably been the best thing we've ever done. We also, our kids, we homeschooled them the first year when we were in DC. The second year, we're like, okay. And that was great, by the way, because you had all the museums in the world. We were going to every single Smithsonian museum and doing reports, and it was great. But after that first year, we're like, let's get them into schools, right? So oldest son went into 8th grade, youngest went into 5th grade. And Virginia schools, Northern Virginia schools are like the top 20 public schools in the nation. Really good schools, but it's a melting pot. And I come from a diverse background, half Hispanic, half Irish and German. And my kids are used to that growing up in California. But over there was weird. They look like their mom. They're both very Caucasian with blonde hair, blue eyes. And they would be in school and you would, because of the melting pot that DC is or was, they would have like literally peers, same age kids that are like Somalis, and they would be like Somali gangs. And they, one of those go up to, hey, white boy, how you doing? What do you got for lunch today? It's, and you'd have 3 or 4 of these Somali kids that were doing that. Of course, they're refugees. They came in from somewhere else, and maybe where they were from, that was normal, but that wasn't normal here. So my kids were coming home going, Dad, what do I do? And I'm like, don't put up with it, right? So over time, when it continued, especially my oldest boy, it continued more and more. And then they started, bullying. He's a bigger kid. He doesn't get bullied. He never got bullied anywhere else. But you get a Somali gang of 3 or 4 kids.
Yeah,
graders.
anybody can get bullied
Anybody.
if they're outnumbered 4-1.
Right, absolutely. And they start poking them in the back with a number 2 pencil. So next thing you know, there's Somali kids getting thrown all over the classroom, right? And then I get a call, and so that started happening. It was like, oh, no, we're out of here. But I'll tell you, we come to Idaho. They go to Idaho public schools. My oldest started high school. My youngest went to a middle school here. All that gone. And even in California, I think I heard you before saying you had your kids in private school in California.
Yes.
We've always had ours in private Christian schools, right? Since like 1st grade. And because of that, because of a little bit better education, a little bit different.
We actually we initially started at the public school, and then we went to the private Catholic school, even though the private Catholic school was worse academically.
Right.
And what we also found out, a very interesting tidbit, a lot of the classically like, oh, this is the best school district ever areas, those also coincide with some of the wealthiest, most educated people. Okay. Right. Now, here's the thing. Chicken or the egg? I don't know. But what I do know in some pockets of California, at least the ones I was exposed to, was like, okay, this school ranks really high, but it's not because the school is so great. It's because the parents make $1 million a year. They both have advanced degrees. They're supplementing their kids' academics as well as hiring auxiliary education like Matt, right? So the high schools where I would tutor all of the kids for the SAT, like I'd jack their SAT scores up, right? Teach them math, grammar, really hone them in on the test. And then the schools would get credit for the high SAT scores. It's like, you didn't even do this. The kid came in with a 1,200 and left with a 1,500. You get credit for the 1,500. So whenever people are like, hey, top 20 in the country, or like really good about that, it's like, who's surrounding it, right? And is it really the school teaching? What I found predominantly here in Idaho, and especially West Ada, there is a lot of credit that I give to the actual educators, right? Like you don't have a massive auxiliary education industry. You don't have tutoring centers on every single corner where people are spending tens of thousands of dollars. That's right. So a lot of credit does go, in my mind, to West Ada School District. I think they are doing a really good job. They're absolutely politically neutral. It's a fantastic program.
Fully agree. My kids both came up through West Ada and high school within there, and 100% agree with that. So, and not only that, they thrived where we had to go to private Christian school in California and then top 20 public schools over there. And we're having to deal with all this adversity, whatever, because I think that was generally because of the nature of where we were. Right.
Sure.
And so, and to thrive here. So at the same time, we buy this property, this small homestead, this small farm, gentleman's farm. We don't make any money off it, right? We spend more money than we make.
Let me get in on that Black Angus. We'll make you some money. We'll make you some money.
Well, and exactly. We usually keep one and sell one.
Yeah,
right?
there you go.
Our freezer's always full. But what it allowed us to also do is have a separate education for our kids. Guess what? They're growing up in farm life, and they hated it at first because they've never done that before. But they started learning how to feed the cattle, and they started having to go deal with the chickens every morning. And anytime I had a project, they're helping me with it, and we're cutting down tree limbs. And so they grew up that way through middle school and high school. And I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm super glad we were able to obtain that property when we did and have them have that type of education, right? It's molded them into the men that they are today. Young men in their 20s, by the way. So
that's beautiful, man. I have 3 young boys. My oldest is going into 7th grade, and you know, I'm not going to quarterback myself. I moved here and moved into the community I moved into. Wonderful, great. We're doing great. But having something similar to what you're talking about is definitely on our horizon, I think, in the next few years. If, you know, thanks. I mean, I'm not buying any place at like 8% interest. So
absolutely not.
That ain't happening until that comes down.
Wait a couple of years, I'll come down.
Right. I hope so. Anyway, keep going. So you move. You have this 7 acre. Your boys are starting to learn how to care for cattle, grow food, deal with these things.
And because of that, I mean, it doesn't happen overnight, but things come naturally. You're able to have a large garden. And now you're able to have a lot of vegetables. And what do we do with all this? Well, you have to preserve them, right? You have to keep them. Right. And then, you know, what if something does happen? If you remember when we were in DC and remember those hurricanes and that earthquake and we couldn't get out, if we're hunkered down, we got a great 30 days. But what if we need to have, what's our next goal? Okay, 6 months. What's our next goal after that? 1 year, right? I want to have a year's supply of food for me and all my family just in case. And it's also food. A lot of it you can have freeze dried. A lot of it you can have canned food, and you know, and people say, well, it's so expensive. Freeze-dried food is super expensive right now. It wasn't years ago, and a lot of it lasts 30 years. But if you go to the store on your regular shopping, right, which everybody's shopping bill has gone up, and you're going to buy 2 cans of, let's say, a tomato sauce or beans or green beans or whatever, why not spend an extra little bit of money and buy 4 cans, right? And then as you use those first 2, you go buy another 4. So you can slowly stock up with bags of rice, beans, get Mylar bags, vacuum seal them in there, put them in buckets, and have for a couple of years, long-term storage with those just on your normal grocery shopping. And then include that in part of your pantry and have that as a proper rotation, right? So you just don't have that bag of rice or beans that's been sitting in there for 5 years and it's questionable because you packed it, right? Plan to eat it. Plan to get another thing of rice or beans when you eat that one, right? And start building that up. Canned food is, and I know this from growing up in a grocery store, canned food and the expiration date, it is good a lot longer than the expiration date. What you have to watch out for is dings or dents or anything major like that. That can affect the food inside. But the food itself, if the can is undisturbed and it expired 2 years ago, it's probably really good still, right? So you can slowly start building your pantry and your supply, right? And I hate to call them preps, but it's kind of what it is. You're just building up for adversity, whatever that may be. And so one of the things we talk about financial security. So, oh boy. Well, so back when we were in DC, 2010 to 12, I worked for the Treasury Department, but specifically I worked at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, right? Which is known as the money factory. So separate from the U.S. Mint. U.S. Mint has several mints around the U.S., San Francisco, Denver, Philly, West Point, and they produce coinage and also gold and silver bullion, U.S. bullion. Whereas the money factory, there's one main headquarters in Washington, D.C., and they're very large treasury-looking buildings, but inside is basically like a money factory. And that's the headquarters, and they have another one in Dallas-Fort Worth, the satellite location. That's where they print. You see that B-roll of, sheets of $100 bills off the printing press. That's where they make everything. And, whenever I worked, I was walking around all those floors looking, just standing there and being mesmerized by how much money, I'm sorry, it's not money, it's actually U.S. currency, was being printed, right? And that's where, I had always been a fiscally conservative guy because of the businesses that I ran previously. But I think monetarily looking at what money really is and what is true money and, is paper money true money? Well, no, it's fiat money that the government puts out. It's supposed to be backed, right, by gold, not anymore. But working at a location like that for a couple of years really allowed me to see what was happening. Now, while I was there, they were running 24-hour shifts of engravers, printing press people. Sure. And at that time, if I remember right, they were printing a little north of $990 million a day of face value. Now, we all saw it as product. It's not money to us. It's just product. It's paper, right?
Yeah.
We're there to protect it. But 990 and change $1 million per day of face value that was getting printed out of those presses there. So we were printing to oblivion. And I saw that. I took part in securing it, transporting it. Now, for those that don't know, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing is part of the U.S. Treasury Department, and they make the money, but they don't monetize it. And what that means is the Federal Reserve has 12 Federal Reserve banks all across the United States. And they order from the U.S. Treasury, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, the BEP, they order how much currency they need. The currency is produced. In those days, it was almost $1 billion a day in a 24-hour period that was just being printed. And then it would get stored in our secured vaults there. And then it would get shipped off by secured transport, then a secured airplane to all the different 12 Federal Reserves all over the country. The Federal Reserve Bank would then monetize that currency and then distribute it to all the local banks from there. So that's kind of the way that your dollar bill, the fiat currency, works.
And the process of monetization, to be really clear, that's where the Federal Reserve initiates entering this bill into the money, the flow of money.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they basically, when they monetize it, they enter into the flow of money, it gets counted onto the federal roll, the U.S. Treasury. There's a lot of other money in their eyes, and I say in air quotes because it's really not true money. We'll talk about true money in a minute, but there's a lot of other money that they just simply type in a computer and generate, right? Credit, anytime you use a credit card or whatever, it creates money. Right. Not all that is printed. They only print what they need. In those days, it was almost $1 billion a day. I heard from some of my buddies that are still there, it's more. Right. They've ramped up production since then, right? So,
right. And again, you can just increase the amount or decrease the amount of interest banks have to pay. Like you can increase the money supply, and increase the amount of money that a bank could loan out based on how much they have. So, say I have $100,000 in savings, and they're like, all right, you can loan out twice as much as you have in savings. Well, they can change that overnight and say you can loan out 10 times as much. Right. So it was before I had $200,000 to loan out because I had $100,000 in savings accounts. Now they're like, no, you can do $1 million. So they just increased my money supply, up $800,000, and then that money then comes into reality when I loan it out. Then I'm getting interest on it. It's
which
wild.
Is out of thin air, basically, right?
Poof! It's like, oh, I just have money. Like I have money. Like money appeared. This was an interesting. In 2008, 2009, when the housing market crashed, there was an article that I remember reading saying something that like the American homeowner lost like $2 trillion, and I remember having a conversation with somebody, a debate, and I was still a younger guy. I was like 26, 27. I'm like, they didn't really lose it. Okay. What this means is it's not like they had it. They had like $3 trillion in their hand and then it was gone. They're like, oh, what did I do? It was under the couch. What it means is that the amount of money that they can get for an asset has decreased.
The value.
Right. The value. But the value is just an opinion until you actually realize the sale, right? So it's like they didn't lose anything. It's not like they had the money and then it got stolen from them. The opinion of the value of their property has just been decreased. And by the way, they can realize that opinion if they sell it, and it may be less than they thought, which was their opinion, it was worth. But like nobody lost that money. Like this is just funny. These are funny numbers that people are throwing around. Unfortunately, people count the opinion of value as actual money. It's like, that's not money.
Totally true. And you can, as an analogy, you can use that in the stock market. Like I own this stock and you don't pay any taxes. You don't do anything. The stock can go up, stock can go down. It's all value. It's all paper value, right? It isn't until you actually sell the stock and realize that value that you now have to pay capital gains. So very similar thing. Up until then, it's just an asset that you own that's kind of on paper and in the air, right? So similar thing. So what we saw, and I mean, even back then, I thought I was a pretty savvy guy in accounting and finance, and I'm like, we're just like printing like crazy, right? This is going to catch up with us. And I start researching, listening to other people out there like Peter Schiff, and there's a whole bunch of other people that are like, nope, it's going to catch up with us. And to this day, it's still going to catch up with us. It hasn't been rectified yet. And not only that, we printed more. So I'm not going to get into all that, but our federal debt is like over 35 trillion right now. And on average, the federal debt doubles every 8 years. So 2032, we're going to be at 70 plus trillion. Like we barely make enough, and that we can barely pay down the debt, the interest on that debt service.
And by the way, we took out that debt, that 35 trillion at like 0% interest.
Well, absolutely.
Right. So now, if we were struggling to pay it back at like the 0.5% or the 0.25% that we owed people, what's going to happen when we have to pay them back at 5% or 3% or whatever?
Exactly. Yeah. The problem that the Federal Reserve is having with higher interest rates right now. Because if you have higher interest rates, guess what? The government on those bonds also has to pay the higher interest rates. But you can't lower the interest rates. Why? Because if you do, inflation it's going to turn to hyperinflation.
We are in the craziest time. Like this season of the United States is so lit. It is just wild. Like what is going to happen? I have no idea. And like, man, anyway, keep going. I get excited.
It's funny because me too. Because you hear people say, I mean, all through all my lifetime, over 50 years now, I mean, people say, wow, I mean, this is the worst time it's ever been, or it's the craziest time it's ever been, or this is the most important election it's ever been, right?
It's always the most important election.
It always is, right? But we feel, and I truly believe it really is right now. There's a lot of things that are coming together, which, to use a bad term, that's the can's been kicked down the road long enough that you can't hide it anymore. Even no matter whoever the new president is, they're not going to be able to stop what's coming, right? And I'm a firm believer of that. So
this is going to be wild. This is going to be wild. Keep going. Okay, so financial security.
So financial security. So I looked at that and I'm like, well, okay, I can have some money in the bank. Now, back in those days, keep in mind, you can maybe get 5% right now on a CD. Maybe a little over 5.
Right. 2013, you could get like 0.5%.
Yeah, like 1 would be a really great deal, right? Not like the old days in the 80s, because they had high inflation like we do now, where you were doing commercial paper interest and getting like 10%. But
and even in I remember 2004, 2005, when I graduated college and started my education company and started making, I wasn't making a lot of money, but I had a little. I'm like, okay, how do I learn finance, right? Or money? How do I learn money, right? Somebody's like, well, get a CD, and like you could go into Wells Fargo and get 5.5%, 6%. Right. Just, no problem.
Right.
Like Bank of America, whatever you want.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
And they're turning around making 10 to 12 on it, right? That's what they do. So because of the printing, because of everything else and things that I saw, I'm like, Now my father, who had always been a business guy all his life, had always not been a huge collector, but he was pretty moderate collector of metal, gold and silver, bullion. And we can have a whole nother podcast just on this, but so
this is definitely going to be a multi-step.
And why? Because metal, gold and silver, bullion, and government printed coins have been true money for thousands of years, right? That's real money. The paper that you see nowadays is just fiat money backed by a government. And then to backtrack more on that, you start doing more research and you see that, President Roosevelt in 1933 created an executive order that basically banned all gold ownership. Why did he do that? Except for jewelry. Why do you do that? Well, the Great Depression started in 1929, 1930-ish, lasted for like 10 years, and people didn't trust. They were pulling their fiat money out of the banks, and they didn't trust. Oh, and by the way, back in those days, you can go in and trade your fiat money for physical gold. Why? Because our gold under the Constitution, our fiat money was backed up by 40% gold, right? So back in those days, you can actually go to the bank and say, hey, here's $100. I want my value in gold back. So people were hoarding gold. And so President Roosevelt was like, we got to put a stop to this. And 1933 created a ban on gold. You couldn't own gold bullion, only jewelry. It was illegal. You had to turn it in. You would get X amount. Now, back in that day, 1933, let's say 1932, price of gold was, for an ounce of gold, whatever it may be, a bar around, was about $20 and change, right? Today, it's a little over $2,400. Just say $2,400 an ounce. So I always tell this to people when I talk to them and say, look, this is the value and this is the true money. So let's just say, and I have something here. Let me show you.
It hit me. That's 100. That's a factor of 120.
Yes.
120 in 90 years.
Absolutely.
Man, have you heard of the, what is it? Not 40, but like there are some countries that are initiating something like 100-year loans on properties because people can't afford,
they can't afford it.
Right. Like the inflation has gone so high and the value of the currency is decreasing so much. They're like, hey, look, we'll just work this out. Like you ain't ever going to pay this. We know that. But like, I'll give it to you for 100 years. It's like
almost like car loans that are going to like 8 and 10 years now, right? Similar thing.
Right.
So true money, gold and silver. This here is a United States. It's called a gold buffalo, right? So it has a face value of $50.
See that bad boy.
Face value of $50 U.S. currency, but it's actually worth a little over $2,400 in gold right now as of today. It's like $2,420. So in addition to making that, the United States also makes the gold eagle, and they also make silver as well. But this is the gold eagle. It's 1 ounce. Now, again,
2,400. This is so.
These are about worth.
What is it? What is the currency value?
When I say it's worth, I'm talking about spot price.
Yes.
And spot price is the currency value to U.S. currency.
So that's $50. That's spot price in U.S. currency.
No, this is $50. If I want to go to grocery store right now, they're going to look at me and I'm like, hey, I got 2,400. They're going to be like, no, it says $50. I'm taking it as $50 U.S. currency. Gotcha. However, because it's a 1 solid ounce piece of gold, the gold spot price in it is worth $2,400 just for the gold alone, right? So that's the difference between like a generic coin and a sovereign coin. So this is sovereign. Also, this is a Canadian maple leaf. This is 1 ounce Queen Elizabeth in the front and a maple leaf in the back. That is also a 1 ounce gold coin minted by the Royal Canadian Mint in Canada. And so that again is worth, when you say spot price, or some people say melt price, that means the value that it is today on the market. So
of metal, of gold.
Yeah, I'll just call it 2,400, but it's like 2,420.
So all three of these bad boys, this is about what, 7,200?
In addition to that, I have what's called generic bullion. And this here is Pamp Swiss, very popular brand, Swiss made. This is actually Lady Fortuna. If you look at the back, it has an assay card and you can read that. It talks about that it's actually 1 troy ounce of gold, which is like 31 and change grams. And that's just generic bullion, but that's a highly sought after one. And believe it or not, this is the one that Costco carries and sells. It's the Lady Fortuna right here. Now, they don't always get them in, maybe once a month. It's usually on a Friday. And they usually only get about a dozen of them in. So as soon as you come in and buy them out. Now, the whole game in metals is it's worth the 1 ounce of gold that it is. That's the spot price. So let's say 2,400 today.
Gotcha.
But when a retailer or a dealer sells it, they have what's called a premium. And on right now, the premiums vary, but right now,
because they have to get paid for the security, the exchange, like, and this isn't going into
to mint this, right?
Right. So, like my son is really into, my 10-year-old's really into like the $2 bill, right? I'm like, oh, well, we could go to the bank and get a couple $2 bills. And, you know, if you want 5 of them, we need to bring in $10 because the bank doesn't make any money on exchanging the currency. But that's not the same thing with this.
It's not the same thing.
It took time and energy. So there's value in the raw material, but then the actual creation, transportation, exchange costs something.
Yep, absolutely. And since these are minted by the United States government, meaning meaning they only make them here in the U.S. government. Gold buffaloes, gold eagles. They have to use U.S. metal, right? They can't go buy gold from China or wherever else. They have to use U.S. metal. It's in the Constitution, and they run out every year. But because of that, there's also a design put into them, right? This is the old buffalo nickel. This buffalo, right? It has a buffalo on the back, Indian head on the front, and because of that, and because dealers sell them, they sell to the U.S. government sells to 5 or 6 major bullion dealers. They then take them and sell them to all the other local dealers, right? So they have to make money in there. So typically, especially the highest price is a government minted coin. You're looking at about 6% premium on top of that gold price, right? So you're going to pay $130 maybe on top of that spot price to buy one of these brand new. The great thing about Costco, if you ever want to consider buying gold bullion at Costco, is they're the lowest price ever. Now you're limited. You can only buy a couple, but they really are. Now I don't get paid for them. I'm not sponsored, but this Pamp Swiss is on sale right now in a lot of the big online dealers on sale for $75 to $79 above spot. When Costco gets these in, they're selling them for $29.99 over spot. You literally cannot find that price anywhere else.
So you have to pay for the price of the gold, the actual the actual value of the gold, and then they're like, and just give me $30.
Yeah, well, and whatever the premium is, which it's usually a percentage. Like gold, it's usually 2 to 6%, right? Depending on where you're at. So, and that fluctuates as well. So, the analogy or the story I'm going to tell you: 1933. Gold was actually confiscated. It was banned. You couldn't own it unless it was jewelry. Let's just say it's 1932. Great Depression has started. I've got 5 1-ounce pieces of gold here, right? Valued at today's price about $2,400. But let's just say
$2,400 each.
$2,400 each. But follow me here. We've got a story. So I've got 5 ounces of gold. Let's just call it 5 ounces of gold.
Right.
And I've got a U.S. $100 bill, fiat currency. And the date is sometime in 1932. And Matt goes to stick these under his mattress in 1932. Okay. Now you wake up this morning and it's 2024 and you pull these items out of your mattress. Which one of these are worth more?
I'm going to go ahead and say the gold.
Ta-da.
Ta-da.
Right? Why? Right. So why is because that gold now is worth $2,400. And you have 5 of them. So just in this little piece here, and we'll talk about why this is important, it's $12,000 right there. Where this is still a $100 US note. But $100 in 1932, back then you could probably still buy a loaf of bread and a quarter a gallon of milk for 5 cents. Now there's at least $5, right? So what happened to this $100 since 1932? You lost 98% of the value of this money due to inflation. So this, in reality, it's still $100. You can go out and buy whatever you can get for $100, but you've lost 98% of the value in that. Now, what have you done here? Well, these were worth about $20 each, and now they're worth about $2,400 each, right? So what does that tell you? Well, that tells you gold is real money. It's been real money for thousands of years. Civilizations and people have been keeping gold and silver for thousands of years as real money. It's divisible, it's fungible, it's recognizable, and you can't make more of it. Whatever you mine and the cost to mine it and get it out of the ground is all you got, right? Whereas this, you can print your way to oblivion as long as you want, as much as you want. That's what creates inflation. So the reason why you talk about having real money, God's money, as financial security is, now, it's a hunk of metal. It's a 1-ounce hunk of metal. Happens to be gold, one of the most conductive.
But cross-culturally, worldwide, for millennia, we have agreed that this hunk of gold has inherent value.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
and so what does it do? Well, it doesn't pay dividends. It sits in a safe or a locked facility somewhere and sits there. There's no interest. There's no dividends. It's not a really great investment. But I think I just reflected and showed that what it does, especially nowadays with high inflation, it's a hedge for inflation. It's an insurance policy. So a lot of people that I know of and a lot of preppers, what they will do, and again, no financial advice, but you should always have a well-diverse financial portfolio.
Okay, look, here's the deal. I gotta get home to my kids. I got a couple text messages. I really want you to come back and keep going because I feel like your background is phenomenal. I totally get it, but we're just starting to scratch the surface of what prepping means for you, how you engage in this, what considerations you take when you're making your decisions. So if you'd be good with it, I'd love to do round 2.
Sure. Okay. Anytime.
Fantastic.
Let me know.
Listen, John, I really appreciate you. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.